You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network. This is Talking Headways, a weekly podcast about sustainable transportation and urban design. I'm Jeff Wood. This week we're featuring a one-to-one conversation between Aidil Ortiz, principal at Aidilisms, and Mary Kate Morookian, a transit planner at Kimley Horn. Aidil and Mary Kate discussed the Durham Transit Plan and how they approached public engagement while centering the community in the process. Stay with us. Today's podcast was produced in partnership with Railvolution. For a deeper dive on livability issues or more information about the annual conference live in Miami, go to railvolution.org. That's railvolution.org. Today's podcast is brought to you by our super generous Patreon supporters. Thanks so much for supporting the show each month. We really appreciate it. To join this merry band of infrastructure nerds and zoning wizards, go to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. $2 a month gets you stickers and a handwritten note with a cool stamp. $10 a month gets you one of our bus-only scarves. Still working on some new designs for scarves and some other cool merch, and looking forward to sharing those with you all soon when they're finished. Also, because we do a lot of episodes covering a lot of books, we've partnered with bookshop.org as an affiliate. This means that if you buy a book through the Overhead Wire shop on Bookshop, a small amount of that purchase goes to us. Now, we love when you order from your local bookstores, but if you want to support the authors we have on the show and help keep us interviewing them, that would be tremendous. All the books we've ever discussed on the show with the authors are now in the shop. That's bookshop.org/shop/theoverheadwire. That's bookshop.org/shop/theoverheadwire. And finally, check out the Overhead Wire Daily Newsletter, established in 2006. We were doing it way before anyone else thought it was cool. Join thousands of readers and sign up for a 2-week trial at theoverheadwire.com to check it out. That's a 2-week free trial at theoverheadwire.com.
Hi, my name is Mary Kate Morookian. I'm a transit planner with Kimley Horn. My office is based in Raleigh, but we're a national firm with a national transit practice. And I'm here today to talk about the Durham Transit Plan, which we were hired by the Durham Chapel Hill Carborough MPO to update.
Hey, and my name is Aidil Ortiz, founder and owner of Aidilisms, a consultancy that focuses on connection, culture, and equity based in Durham. And my work is around leading the equitable community engagement related to the Durham Transit Plan. I have the honor of working with Kimley Horn to do that. And so, we've been doing this whole thing remotely during a pandemic. And we have to confess, we're sitting in my kitchen with my really annoying pandemic puppy that is so excited to have company over. So you may hear puppy paws in the background. So in full transparency, do not let that distract you. But I wanted to dig in a little and learn more about, your experience in the area, Mary Kate, and the region.
Sure, yeah. I guess we've never really gotten into that. I moved around quite a bit growing up, but I spent high school and college in North Carolina, did some planning work when I graduated, but then moved to New York for grad school and studied transit. I stayed for a few years and worked for public agencies in New York and New Jersey, New York City Department of Transportation, New Jersey Transit, where I fell in love with buses and all things operations. And then got married, had a baby, and moved back to North Carolina where my parents were, and worked for Go Triangle and Go Durham, local and regional service providers in the Raleigh-Durham, Chapel Hill area. And then started my work with Kimley Horn in their transit practice, which brought me to the Durham Transit Plan, which brought me to this lovely lady, Aidil.
Oh, that's so interesting. I didn't realize you've been in North Carolina that long. That's pretty cool. I've been living in North Carolina for 34 years in this particular region, 20 of them specifically in Durham. And, it's interesting because even though the majority of my professional experience has been in social justice work, doing community advocacy campaigns to get directly impacted people into, the offices of their elected officials or doing media work, buried in all of that advocacy work was actually like the very beginnings of my transit oriented work, which was about 15 or so years ago, working on a project in my neighborhood around the Alston Avenue NC-55 road, which is run by the NCDOT, and it was going to be redesigned and widened, and it was going to demolish our local grocery store. So my original foray into transit was around that, to make sure that we could preserve a community sensitive design. And we ended up getting federal protection for the grocery store.
Los Primos?
Yes.
Oh,
yes. So Los Primos was going to be demolished.
Oh.
Dominican grocery store. I'm Dominican. Shout out Dominicans. And so we got federal protection for the grocery store. We got bike lanes. We got a preemptive road diet by way of adding parking to the outer lanes. And so that kind of morphed into sitting on the Bicycling and Pedestrian Advisory Commission and just being interested mostly in the intersection of public health and the built environment. And now have been for the last 3 years independent and doing community consulting around engagement for these kinds of large scale tax funded infrastructure projects. And so that's landed me here to you in my kitchen.
Well, I'm so glad that we are here in your kitchen. Let's give the listeners of the podcast a little context. I guess, Aidil, why don't you start? How would you describe just this region, the Triangle region, as we call it, Durham, Raleigh, Chapel Hill, especially for people that are interested in transit or mobility development, affordable housing, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, so the Triangle is home to some of the most powerful organizations within research, education, technology, government, and culture within the state. So Raleigh is our state capital. Durham has been a hub for lots and lots of prosperity and business throughout the years and history of North Carolina overall. And what these things mean is that we have a really diverse population in the area, and we're growing. You know, lots of people are coming to this area from places that have probably more transit resources than we do at the current moment. But we also face quite a lot of disparities in how people experience this region. There's not as much transit as I think folks who service these large companies need, but the backbone services like transit are struggling, quite frankly, to keep up with staffing, especially as we all experience collectively a pandemic. And if we want to expand transit and make it the system we want, we're going to need to make some changes. And so for us, we don't have rail currently, unless you're talking about Amtrak. It's mostly bus. But we do have a really extensive, throughout the region, I'd say a really extensive trail system. So lots of open space in this area. A lot of people sometimes refer to the Research Triangle Park as a large park of sorts because there's so much open space out there. Always room for improvement, but do you have any thoughts about the region and how you would typify it through your professional experience?
Yeah, I'd say that this region definitely, like you said, the transplants coming to the region from all over the country. Like you said, a lot of places have a much more developed, mature transit system than we do. But Durham has a really productive and important local bus network. It's a really productive system for a city this size. And then Go Triangle with the regional bus network connecting suburbs of Raleigh with Durham and Chapel Hill. It's impressive what this region is able to do with the just the bus service that they have. So I remember when I started working specifically with the Durham Transit Plan, and around the same time, the Orange Transit Plan and the Wake County Transit Plans, I was still working in the public sector for Go Triangle, Go Durham, those bus public transit agencies. And it was really exciting. The transit tax was passed. It was a 50-cent sales tax that was, totally dedicated towards funding transit improvements within the region. And it was really exciting to work on planning those services. It was new services. It was improvements to existing routes, re-envisioning what the system could look like that had existed for a while, was serving people, but was it serving the people that really needed it? Was it getting people to the places that they really needed to be based on how rapidly the region was changing and, how the demographic makeup of the region was changing. Everything was changing. I remember a big part of the original transit plan, and just to give you a little context for these transit plans, the half-cent sales tax goes to fund these transit improvements. There has to be an approved, official, formal plan in place that dictates where those funds are going to go. So there's a very robust, intentional, thoughtful planning process that goes way ahead of actually implementing these services. And that has to be approved by the designated elected bodies. So there was a plan that was approved. It included light rail. The Durham Transit Plan initially had.
And that plan was from 2012. 12. That's right.
Yeah. So that plan included light rail from Durham to Chapel Hill. That took up a lot of the programmable funds. It was a huge project, a really good project, but it ended up not moving forward. It was officially discontinued in 2019. And because that project was not going forward, it had initially been earmarked to receive a lot of the funds in the financial model over the full life of the plan, which was through 2040. So the plan had to be updated to identify new projects that would receive the benefits of that funding. So that's when Kimley Horn was hired to do that plan update. And at that time I was then working at Kimley Horn. So I got to work on it. I got to work on it double, which is
both sides.
on both sides. So that's been really fun. But I'd say one of the biggest things that I have learned while revisiting this effort is it's not just an update. Oh, let's pick a new project to put in here. It's let's revisit this. What do people need? Who is using the transit system now? Who would use it if it went here, or it was this frequent, or it ran to this time? And where are those people? So it's just been really interesting and fun and challenging to get to revisit a lot of those questions. Yeah. And it's even though I'm a Durham County resident myself, it's helped me get to know Durham a whole lot better.
And, during the sort of like outreach for communicating the options this time around, let me know how many sort of holes in people's knowledge there was. I think that when people think about anything related to a train, they don't necessarily know the difference between a light rail and a commuter rail. Differentiating rail projects was really important this time around, and making sure that people understood we weren't re-proposing the same plan.
Yes.
That was really important to us, to keep that trust through really good communication discipline, and what were the options moving forward in terms of what was possible with the constraints. And so helping people understand the devil in the details without overwhelming them was, I think, a huge goal this time around, as we tried to get a sense for where people are now in terms of what they need now that they've had one plan and now they need a new one.
Right.
They're like, I thought we did this. And we're like, oh, but wait.
Yeah. Right. No, you're so right. I think that's been a really interesting piece of it, is reminding people that we did a transit plan a lot, and that a lot of stuff has already been implemented. A lot of good changes have already happened.
This did give a great opportunity to come back to people and say, we promise we haven't just been sitting on our hands doing nothing.
Yes.
No.
Look at this. So that's been nice to be able to talk about the improvements that have already happened as part of the Durham Transit Plan, and hear about how is it going. More of this would be good. Something different, going back and getting to reevaluate those services has been nice too. But yes, also explaining yes, we did this, but this piece is no longer happening. And it's not going to. It has been a little tough explaining. I know light rail was a cool project, but it's really, really not moving forward. But we are going to identify other projects that serve those needs. So that's also important to communicate, that travel needs, these origin destination needs, this volume of people. We know that we need to still move these people. Light rail just isn't the mode. So we're going to identify other great projects that will satisfy those needs and, help people get on the bus, get on whatever is going to get proposed.
And this time around, like, some things are different in Durham in terms of expectations for engagement. I know that when the original Durham Transit Plan was passed, much like other large scale plans, our standards for engagement and what that looked like it was just a different time. And boy, did we pick a cool time to start re-envisioning engagement at a time when, I think everyone's kind of like back to square one, trying to understand how to connect and message appropriately, especially to people who would be most directly impacted by these kinds of systems and who most rely on them. And those populations, we've always called them, which as an engagement strategist, I hate this term, hard to reach populations, because to me, all you're doing is confessing that you have no investment or actual relationships with this population. The poor are relatively easy to find. We make sure that they are corralled in very specific places. And if you're just uncomfortable going there, say that. There's a difference. But anywho, that's my personal stump speech on that. But in Durham, there was a equitable community engagement blueprint that was brought about probably like a year before the pandemic got started, roughly, a little less than a year. And it became sort of this framework of practices that they wanted things like the transit plan, like our comprehensive plan, et cetera, to start abiding by. And so we've got some new tweaks to the way we do engagement that I think are pretty interesting as we move forward in reaching out to the community about what they want to see in their future transit projects and their transit mix. And that's been really fun.
So Aidil, you said something that I think is really important, and it's one of the things that I think makes your work specific to you, Aidil's work and Aidil's particular skill set really, really valuable. And that's how you take the focus of engagement and make it very clear who we are trying to reach with this engagement. It's something that I've learned from this process and working closely with you is the traditional post a survey online, hold a public workshop, go set up a table at the transit center. You can do that and you'll get some responses, but you are not necessarily going to hear from the people that you are trying to hear from. You are going to maybe have some missed opportunities to talk with the folks that actually are using these services every day. So we have a program within the transit plan, the Ambassador Engagement Program.
Right.
And I think that has been a game changer for how we have been approaching outreach with this plan. Can you talk a bit about the Engagement Ambassador Program, just what it is and just how, incredible it's been?
We were lucky because, the comp plan had been underway almost like lockstep with the transit plan. And they went ahead and made some early investments in the recruitment of an engagement, what we refer to as like this cohort of residents that have direct and primary and trusted relationships with local folks who often do not show up in traditional ways inside of these kinds of processes, right? So we've seen the numbers, right? That when you do the stuff traditionally, in transit specifically, like white and rich, wealthy men love to talk about cars and buses and trains and planes and all of that. They love it. And it's okay that they love it.
And it's okay to be a white, wealthy man. If you're listening, we just
fine. Need room for other people to show up in the data, because that is not what Durham looks like. Durham is still what we refer to in a lot of literature as a majority minority city, which, I hate the word minority.
Thing to say.
Weird. Because I'm like, but we're the majority, like globally. Anyway, so, but we're a community that has a lot of diversity, a lot of people of color. And we do definitely also have our fair share of people who are living with fewer resources, financial resources. And I think it's important for us to attend to very mindfully and put a prioritization to communicating with that audience first, because it does take more time. It does take a little more effort to dig into those communities to make sure that they have enough time with all the competing tensions and interests in their life to actually respond to what we need to know, right? And we also have to offer them the respect of contextualizing why them taking their time on this information actually helps anything, right, going on. Because there's also a lot of like data for the sake of data collection of in these communities. A history of research institutions is going in and surveying the crap out of local residents, and it's for nothing except, some graduate students' grade. And that is also really frustrating because we're competing against all that history. So the engagement ambassadors is a cohort of residents that already have trust and relationships with people that we want to talk to: low-income people, people who are formally justice involved or currently justice involved, people who are immigrants, people who don't necessarily speak English, young people, the elderly, people with disabilities, people who identify as LGBTQIA, all these different things. We wanted to make sure we had inroads into those populations. So we made a priority list of people that we wanted to include as engagement ambassadors. And engagement ambassadors are people who we spend more time drilling down and training in terms of the context of this plan, why this plan matters, the questions that we're looking for. They got a chance to give feedback on the questions themselves. Yep. And so a little bit of the design. And also they helped us get the word out once the survey was designed, and they were compensated with a stipend for participating in this because they have assets and they have skills, and they need to be, in some way, shape, or form, there needs to be a gesture towards supporting the value of that. So they were not subcontractors, but we stipended them. We offered like a gift card for their time with the program. And so that was roughly about 40 people throughout Durham.
And how did you recruit them, Aidil?
Oh, so here's the thing. Yeah. So this little 20 years in Durham that I've had, mostly within the nonprofit sector, has been all very community driven. So I've been hanging out at the local public schools and hiring youngsters for some nonprofit work and partnering with other folks and involved in culture and placemaking and running my own community events and setting up the, whether it's like a tree planting or community cleanups, and you babysit enough people's kids. And I think that combination of everything of like, I too have my own authentic relationships, and I have leveraged those relationships and said, what do you think about this? Would you be willing to help your neighbors have this conversation and collect this data so that our data can be more reflective of the Durham we know and love?
And do you have access? I mean, you very pointedly asked,
do you know people?
Yeah. Do you know people that are
if you don't,
these people? Yeah.
You are not our target audience. You can be surveyed, but you should not be the engagement ambassador. And so, we did ask people whether they had, I think it was like 10 or more contacts, and so there were people who were like formerly homeless and in the recovery community, and they are continuing to work in that community, continue to go back to the shelter that they felt helped them get back on their feet. And they, promised to do outreach in that way. And we just loved that. We loved that people wanted to use their own relationships, their own name, their own reputation to get that out there. And so we've been doing that for several rounds of engagement now. And I think the data speaks for itself, because it's the opposite of what it looked like before we did this,
It really is.
Like literally the opposite. So now over 70% of the respondents are people of color or people who are low income. And I think that's
that's huge. That's huge.
Yeah. And that's more reflective of who uses the local public transit system anyway.
I was just going to say, to have a demographically representative survey result, never in my career I experienced that.
Yeah.
That was insane. And also during a pandemic, we had 2 rounds of outreach. And just to provide a little bit more context, Kimley Horn is what we'd say the prime consultant for this transit plan.
Right.
And Aidil is working with us as a partner, leading the outreach. So she's in everything. She's helping develop the materials, design easy to understand graphics and language, and the engagement ambassador piece, which in my opinion is the most important piece of our outreach effort.
You want the ultimate product to be believed.
Yes. Well, you want it to be believed, and you want the people to feel like you said, survey fatigue, and also asking questions just to ask them and check a box. It's not helpful. And it also makes people feel like their time was wasted. And, you know,
Mhm.
what did my answer really
Mhm.
provide? And being able to say,
Mhm.
these are the folks that ride the services today. These are the folks that we got to take the survey through the Engagement
Mhm.
Ambassador program. Here's what we said. And because of that, here's what we're going to propose as a
Yeah.
project.
It's a
That's
nice little chain of logic that just appears.
yes. And it's validating. It's validating as a professional.
Mhm.
It must be better to see that, I imagine, as a survey respondent, to say, okay, I said this, they heard me, and now there's this project on the street.
Mhm. Yeah. And I mean, I think that one of the other things that was cool is that, y'all, it's a pandemic out here, right? And
Yes.
people were often hurting at this time, you know, for money, for
Social
and
interaction.
exactly. And I think that we got it right in terms of giving folks an opportunity, an excuse to go knock on their neighbors' doors. Like, I love the engagement ambassadors that have been living in our public housing communities.
Mhm.
I mean, they killed it. They rocked out, knocking on those doors, sitting on that chair on their front porch, and anybody who would walk by, hey, come up here, got to talk to you about something. And they were real leaders, serious leaders.
yeah.
in when we look at like the counts. And that's really important because our public housing communities, obviously we want folks to feel like what they need shows up in this plan.
I will never forget. So we had, like I said, we had 2 rounds of engagement that involved the engagement ambassadors. The first round, I want to say, I don't remember the exact number of responses, but it was under 1,000, or right. It was definitely under 1,000. And then, but it was still a huge chunk of the responses were directly from engagement ambassador recruited, you know, that from those events.
Yeah.
And then the second round, it was over 2,000 responses during a pandemic. You told me people were taking these surveys to their outdoor Zumba classes, like in the public, the public works department, like the Parks and Rec department sponsored Zumba classes.
I think our first round also happened during colder months, and our second round happened during warmer months. So there was an opportunity to go to the soccer games, to the outdoor school events. It was also
like scarier COVID. It was like, it was back when everybody was like, really not doing anything.
People were getting like their first round of vaccinations during the second round. So we had some things working for us that second time around.
We did. But the ratio of engagement ambassadors was still so impressive. It was over half. Over half of the responses were directly from engagement ambassadors bringing in these. I remember coming to your house to pick up the paper surveys.
Boxes and boxes of paper surveys.
I was thrilled and also
scared.
Afraid. I was like, oh, these are
where are my interns?
A lot of surveys to input.
Yeah.
But Aidil has a great big front porch, and it was filled with paper surveys. Which
people were dropping them off in like manila envelopes. I'm sure people thought I was up to something nefarious at that time. My neighbors were like, what is going on? But
Aidil's popular, but that.
Yeah, I might be popular, but not that popular.
Exactly.
So in terms of thinking about like the whole project and what you've heard via engagement, like what were any kind of light bulbs that struck you from the data? I've got my thoughts. I'm just curious what yours are, because I've been intimately sitting with this and talking to people.
Well, I think some of the biggest things that we heard, we knew, you know, people want the existing system to work better for them.
Yeah.
The people that are using the Go Durham, Go Triangle system, they know their routes.
They sure do.
They know the connections ins and outs. They make it work for them. People want the existing system to work. So frequency.
Yep.
Later service.
That's right.
And they just want to make sure that they can, it's not crazy asks. I want to be able to pick up my kid from daycare. I want to be able to get to that job, keep my job. I want to be able to apply to this job. So I need to get on the bus earlier, stay later. It's not hard stuff.
Yeah.
Or I don't want to sit on the bus for 2 hours anymore. I need a more direct connection.
Right. Yeah, I've heard that. I heard that loud and clear. I also heard that the actual conditions of the bus stops are ridiculous at this current moment. And there's some other data that Kimley Horn put together about the status of ADA compliance for all the bus stops and where we have fallen short in Durham. And that number really broke my heart. I already had a little bit of a window into that because I had that a lot. I heard that a lot in the data, but also around that same time, I had another client that was doing a sidewalk assessment and wanted feedback from residents around sidewalk assessment so they could make sure that there's an equity component there. And let me tell you, putting up signs at all of the transfer stops, you get a good window into that. So I think that actual time on the ground combined with what I heard on the survey, there were a few bus stops that actually left me in tears because every time I'd stop to put up a sign about the sidewalk assessment survey that was going on at the same time as the transit plan engagement, I tried to put myself in the shoes of like a mom with groceries and small children and a stroller or a person who had a mobility device. I just could not believe that this was the status of some of our most highly frequented bus stops. It was scary, actually.
That's a really good point. Not all of the data we collected was ridership data or, things related, what kind of improvements do you want to see? A lot of it was what do the bus stops look like? How many miles of sidewalk are there currently? And there are other efforts going on kind of in tandem with the Durham Transit Plan. There's the Better Bus study that's looking at bus stop improvements in Durham. But yeah, you're right. A lot of folks, they don't want anything crazy. They want a nice bus stop that has a shelter and a trash can and a bench and a paved pad so that they can safely exit the bus via a ramp. They want to safely push their kids to the bus stop. They want to safely board the bus. And then the bus improvements and good crosswalks. They want to be able to just feel safe in a well-lit, well-marked area. And so just keeping that in mind, it's a planner's, I think, inclination or first desire to have something special. Like you think this is special, like this is going to get people excited. But yeah, there are big shiny projects that make people excited, but people are also excited about being able to get home from work on time. And they're excited about having 15-minute service and they're excited about having a reliable transit system. So that's also been really important to keep in mind and something that I've really learned more about through this process.
I think the kindest way I can put it when I look at all the data and all the competing priorities for the money is that people don't care how they get what they need at the dosage that they need it, right? They don't care. So they're kind of agnostic about how we deliver it as long as we deliver it. So, when we think about commuter rail or train or commuter rail or bus, people were not like, this has to be done on a train. They were like, no, it just has to get done. The 15-minute service as often as we can get it, the extension on hours, how often we can get it, the increased number of specific routes that need to be developed, like as long as we achieve it. They're like, we don't care how you do it. As long as you do it and cover the cost, like let's get across that finish line. So there weren't any, in my opinion, I didn't see, at least from the population that I work to focus on, there didn't seem like this huge rally cry that said, commuter rail. I think they just want the outcome.
They want to be able to get where they need to go in a reasonable amount of time. So if it's commuter rail, awesome. Great. But we want to know, can we get to this place? Can I get there within a reasonable amount of time? Will it be affordable? And I think you're right. I think and also people, you talk about paying for it. Folks are ready and willing and want to talk about trade-offs. I remember one of our initial outreach planning sessions that we had, I really liked the way you talked about the budget for the transit plan and communicating it to the engagement ambassadors and communicating it through our surveys household budgeting.
Yeah.
It's like everybody has a household budget.
Yep.
If you explain to people, yeah, we all love shrimp and we all love steak. Can we eat that every night? No, we can have it once a week. So let's budget for that.
Right.
Oh, you want to get this new awesome stove? I'm sitting in Aidil's kitchen looking at her beautiful gilded stove. You want that stove? Okay, then you might have to wait a few more years to get the nice fridge. By the way, she did get the nice fridge at the same time. So that's not a choice.
Sale if you bought them together. They suckered me.
And maybe there's a transit sale. But just communicating that there are trade-offs, that there are things that cost more if you get them later versus you can get this now and then wait 5 years and implement the rest. People are smart and people will understand if you are being transparent,
right? And
just share what you know. It's not hard. Just share what you know and be ready to listen.
There's a lovely author, Aidil and Mary Kate, author of Emergent Strategies. And one of the things that I love in time spent with her and her team and others who practice this in their community facilitation work is that, if you trust the people become trustworthy. And this habit, I think, of folks to want to play hide and go seek with more highly detailed in the weeds kind of stuff isn't helpful. People need to know what the trade-offs are. And I think that because, like you just said, right, everyone has to make sacrifices in their household budget. If you want a really nice front porch, maybe you can't invest in like painting the house that year. Like there's a bunch of stuff people have to make decisions on. And the transit plan is no different. We have a finite amount of money and different projects cost different things. And people need to know commuter rail will have costs to other priorities that they have stated if that is how we choose to move forward with the plan. And so I think that that's the kind of thing we really strive to be forward about and to let people tell us exactly what they think based on the information.
Yep. That's a good way to put it. So I guess the Engagement Ambassador program was also unique in that it provided folks flexibility. So they didn't have to show up at a staffed workshop to ask these questions and administer these surveys. Were there any events or I guess, I don't know if to call them workshops that were led by engagement ambassadors that you thought yielded the best results or?
No, I mean, the thing is,
you helped people learn to use WebEx.
Right.
During COVID. Yeah.
Well, that or Zoom or whatever, like I really wanted it to be scrappy and nimble. So it's like, do you know how to use Google Meet? Do you know how to use Zoom? Do you know how to use Facebook Rooms? Whatever, to kind of like get in the pocket with people and have these conversations. We also wanted people to know that like small is all. That's another Aidil and Mary Kate kind of statement from her Emergent Strategies thing. I think it is typical in our culture to want to like go big or go home when really some of the most nuanced, textured and juicy conversations is with like 3 to 5 people on a conference call line where you're going through information together. And that is the freedom that we gave people to choose the format that made sense for them. And people were not doing this for the money. They were getting a stipend, but they weren't doing it necessarily for the money. The stipend helped during these tough times, I think, to have a little extra pocket change. But for the most part, people reached out to their networks and kind of either did. There's this one woman who has a habit of calling the elders in her church community just to make sure they're okay. So somebody like touches base with them, especially with COVID when it wasn't safe to hang out with the elderly population for fear of getting them sick. And she was like, oh, well, I'll just call, the next time I call all of them. And she literally had one-on-one conversations with every single elderly member of her congregation or that was in her Rolodex. And she already had a habit of doing that. She just folded this into her practice. And that was really the point, that we're asking people and deputizing them in a way, right? Like authorizing them to fold this into their practice. But we selected people that had a practice, right? Of connecting with their neighbors and would have done this whether we existed or not, would have connected with people whether we existed or not. We were just asking them to be specific with some of their time so that we could yield back this data. And we ultimately just wanted to compensate them for the pleasure of being added to their normal way and practice of being with community.
Yeah. And let them know, hey, we value your time and thank you so much because what you're doing is helping. Yeah. So I guess overall,
I can see the look on your face.
Yes. How has it been to work with Kimley Horn, the city, the county?
Yeah. Well, I'll say Kimley Horn specifically has been like a lot more laid back and chill than I think some of the engineers I've run across in my day. And so that was a very pleasant surprise because, you know, it's
you
a
heard
lot
it
of
here,
numbers.
Everybody. We're the fun engineers. Kimley Horn.
Fun engineers. Well, you know, I just appreciate that y'all have been, I think, really open-minded about what it means to communicate this to lay people who don't have as much of a transit background as y'all do, obviously. And I feel like I've been really respected in the opinions that I've gotten a chance to bring to the table about how to share this in a way that allows for community to have a more clear and on the up and up kind of conversation about this, especially because everyone involved, quite frankly, was going to have to figure out, right, the communication problem of like differentiating this from what we had already done in Durham.
Oh, yeah.
We needed to break away from that old story and explain that this was actually a different process and not rehashing a very sticky wound that people can still feel in Durham, quite frankly, around that much work being put into a project and it not panning out.
Yeah.
No matter what your opinion was of the project, I think it's sad to see anyone go through that much effort and then it not, and we had spent a lot of money.
Yeah.
So just to get to that point and then it didn't work. So no, I think that's been a lot of fun. And in general, I feel like the outreach team and the technical teams have also been pretty open. I mean, it's not been without its hiccups sometimes. As is the case though, like I'm a bilingual person and whenever you're trying to translate something, that's not a linear, smooth conversation. It's some trial and error. It takes some doing.
Oh yeah. Making it more of a conversation, it takes more time, but it definitely makes the process more valuable, more fruitful. And I mean, when you're dealing with a large group,
and who know too much for their own good. Like I'm a public health junkie.
Yep.
And people sometimes will
smart
be like,
people.
Yeah. They'll be like, Aidil, but you're a little in the weeds, and so I know I have to come up for air differently. And y'all got a chance to hear me say that to y'all a few times. Like, we don't know what that means.
Right. No, and that's so good. And I think that's been my favorite thing about working with you, Aidil, is that you don't pull punches. And and I like that. I like that there have been, because you make it obvious that, we have a good communication framework set up. We have a good communication set up. But that also leaves room for, checking each other as professionals working through this. But also I feel like, making it a friendly process has really helped. And interacting as people.
People. Go figure that.
I know, interacting as people.
Because, I read our old transit plan, or not our old transit plan. I read our old chapter on transportation within the comprehensive plan of Durham. And people were not actually mentioned in that entire chapter. Just the inanimate objects we're trying to move. Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
So this has been really different. And so question for you is, how has this process made you think differently about being a planner and like working in community?
Oof. The Durham Transit Plan has been a career changing and perception changing project for me, for sure. Really asking the question, who are we planning this for? And where are they? How do I talk to them? Putting in the extra time, the extra work to make that happen. That's been huge for me. I always enjoyed public outreach. Engagement activities were really, that was my favorite part of the planning process. It still is, but now it's been, I go back and I refer to the survey results again and again and again, because we work to identify who are the important groups that we are going to track and make sure that we heard enough from persons of color transit riders, people that say they ride every day, how are we going to make sure that
It's a different level of
it's
accountability.
a different level of accountability? And to then say, before you go out and do the work, say, we are going to find these people, we're going to hear from these people, and then we're going to put what they say into practice. Saying that and then having to do it and report on it, report the number of responses, that has been really great. And it's made a really good product. And I think that it's made our work just more intentional and really I feel good about the plan. And not that I haven't felt good about other plans, but I feel more personally connected to the people that we're planning for. And I live in Durham, and we're planning for Durham. I truly believe that doing engagement in this way, we spend a lot of time on data analysis, identifying the needs, and then asking people that actually use the system, are these also the needs that you feel? And are these the needs that you feel need to be addressed in this order? It's been nice to have that kind of community check, that community validation, that I can really feel confident is accurate because of the number of responses we got and the demographically representative responses that we got. And then I'd say another aha moment for me was, like I said earlier, it's not always going to be the shiny project. Sometimes it's going to be, we are committed to increasing frequency or having later service. It's those projects that get the people that you are planning for most excited.
Yeah. So what are the next steps on this daggone thing? What's up with the Durham Transit Plan next?
So, like I said, we had 2 rounds of outreach. We summarized the second round, presented those. You can actually see those on the website now, the Durham Transit Plan website. The next steps are finalizing the preferred scenario. Right now, we are testing the financial model. So we are at the nerdiest stage, I'd say, of the Durham Transit Plan. We're just making sure that through the life of the plan, which is through 2040, all projects, capital operating projects that are being proposed are realistic. Can we actually afford these over the life of the plan based on the revenue projections from the transit sales tax? So we're working through that right now, and then finalizing the prioritized preferred scenario. So what projects are we going to spend this money on? In what years are they going to be implemented? So we're really close on that. We're working with the technical team to get that all wrapped up, but we're close. We're close.
Great.
Yeah. How will we have, I guess, how do you envision us having that feedback loop with the engagement ambassadors? I feel like that's something you've said is really important.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, when we have that final stage of engagement, this isn't just the stage of like doing that final check, like, is this what you said? How do you think this meets your needs? So it's less in the weeds, because at this point it's specifics that we're talking about and not a whole host of lots and lots of options. I would say that this is also an opportunity for us to say, this is what we did with all of the content that y'all brought in. At every step, I have shared back, like when our staff here have presented in our city and county about the findings of this, like those beautiful slides that you say you keep going back and referring to, I go back and refer to them too. And one of the things I did was share them with engagement ambassadors that had been involved in any part of the process, to say, here's what the data said, y'all banged this out the box, this percentage of these responses came from y'all. So like definitely like celebrating their input on this. So I'll be doing the same with this next survey, saying, here's what all of this crunching has yielded by the transit professionals that are trying to then say, here are the specific things we're going to spend and when it's going to be delivered, and all that good stuff. So it's a good option to hear from, to tell them what we did with the work, and for them to say yay or nay, and how they feel about it before we slide into the voting
final
phase. By
final.
all of the bodies that have to do that voting.
So now that this is kind of wrapping up, this has been a really incredible process, especially to tackle during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
What advice would you give peers in other cities that
Mm-hmm.
are either currently tackling or
Mm-hmm.
are about to undertake a large
Yeah.
region-wide planning process like this?
Well, I'm already talking to those other cities. I can tell you what I tell them,
Good.
which is that you have to start first with the people that have been traditionally left out of these processes and build your capacity to support that. So hire people from your own community who have already developed trusting and varied relationships with target populations and demographics that you want to make sure are included in your work. Set aside the resources to do this. Part of how I got into this work, quite frankly, was because I was really upset at a process that was going on in my own backyard that yielded very poor outreach. Like, I think less than a dozen people participated, and they were compensated quite a sum for that lackluster set of results. And that is what kicked off the city's request of a framework for equitable engagement. And so I think that if people want to arrive at the end of these processes and arrive at like their local city council or county commission and not have people coming out with pitchforks upset about not knowing or not liking the plan, not knowing the process, that they need to start with the end in mind and consider that by prioritizing and resourcing those populations to have this conversation and see them as partners in design of the survey or the questions or the process, and design of the stipend process, the design of who needs to be included in this, and really seeing them as partners and a well of knowledge and skill and expertise and community history. You can ameliorate a lot of folks just with that alone.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's this bi-directional learning. People need to have a certain humility. I have learned an immense amount from this partnership. So, it's not a one-way street, it's a two-way street. And I think that the engineers and urban and transit planners need to feel like they're not seeing the residents they hope to plan for as insurgents of the communities in which they serve. And I don't think that they do that consciously, but I think there is a little bit of an us versus them that I see in lots of different processes playing out in different communities, and it doesn't build goodwill. So start with those who have been hurt the most by past plans, by past development in a community, by economic disparities, and start there, and start with those folks and say, hey, who has that trust already? And let's get into a conversation with them and see. And every community has these folks. Every community has the folks who I'm talking about and who we are so lucky were part of our process here in Durham. There is no community that is not rich in that asset. It's, do you value those people and center them in your process and invite them into a conversation that's honest?
Wow, that was awesome idea.
Thanks. I try.
You should write that down. Sounds really good. I think that wraps it up for us.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for your time, Aidil.
Yeah.
You're the best.
You're the best. Baby and all.
Thank you. I'm very pregnant right now to everyone listening. So you can find more about the Durham Transit Plan at engagedurham.com. Just click on the Transit Plan button and you can see where we are in the process, previous materials that have been posted on the website. And you can contact me, Mary Kate Morookian, at marykate.morookian at Kimley Horn. That's Kimley, KIMLEY-horn.com.
Mm-hmm. And you can find me on Instagram or LinkedIn. And so on LinkedIn, you can find me at Aidil Ortiz, and Aidil is spelled AIDIL. Ortiz is ORTIZ. On Instagram, it is under my company's name, Aidilisms, AIDILISMS.
Thank you so much.
And thanks for joining us. The Talking Kidways podcast is a project of The Overhead Wire and posted first at Streetsblog USA. Thanks to our wonderful Patreon supporters for sponsoring this show and Mondays at The Overhead Wire. You can support the show by going to patreon.com/TheOverheadWire. You You can sign up for our 15-year-old newsletter at theoverheadwire.com, and you can listen to the show on your podcatcher of choice, including Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, and Apple Podcasts. And if you can't find it there, you can always find it its original home at usa.streetsblog.org. We'll see you next time at Talking Headways.